Tonight we're doing one of TREA's how-to workshops to keep you working on reducing your carbon footprint. Gabor Sass is going to present to you on raised garden beds. And my name is Diane Zoller. I'm with Thames Region Ecological Association, and this is one of our projects, and we hope you enjoy this and take action.
All right, welcome everybody. So as Diane said, I'm Gabor, and welcome to our homestead, sassafras homestead. That's my favorite tree. You can guess why. All right, so I've prepared this two-page handout, and we'll link to this on the website. I'll try to talk for a little bit, then I'll demonstrate the nuts and bolts of building raised beds from pallets. Then we'll have some questions. Let's try to make it as informal as possible. Okay, so maybe the first thing, as what you can see behind me, are all these raised beds, which a recent construction here. There's a man in the audience who one day showed up with all these pallets and said, "Gabor, here, build your raised beds." And so I built all these raised beds. So I had in-ground beds up till now, and it was a lot more informal garden, a lot more chaotic. And so that was one of the reasons why we went towards raised beds, is to make it a bit more orderly. Because what happened with when I had beds in the ground was that, in the springtime you start planting and you get overzealous. Like, oh, I'm going to fit in one more tomato, one more this, one more that. And then by the middle and the end of the season, it's a jungle. I couldn't get back there. So I pretty much just, watered and took care of plants here at the side. And anything in there was a lost cause. Many years, that's what happened. So that was one of the reasons why we did this. And yeah, so everything that you see has been in operation for about a year. Okay, so the first question, or the first thing I'd like to talk to you is why raised bed gardening, some of the pros and cons. Maybe I'll just sit down here. All right, so why would you want to do this? So for us, it was one of the main reasons was the orderliness. In small spaces, raised bed gardens give you that structure, right? That you can't really move around from one year to the next, and it shows you where you can plant, and that's
it. Can I interfere? Can I interfere?
Yeah, absolutely.
There, you see, I'm a troublemaker. I told you.
All right.
Okay. Building raised beds. I'm lazy. I don't like to work. Gabor is too busy with the family.
I know that.
So he wants to maximize. You can sit on raised beds too, it's lovely. And your knees get older, your back doesn't bend as much. So the whole idea is a small amount of effort, big return, little labor, more water efficiency, the enjoyment of enjoying a beautiful looking garden, and it's built with raised beds, used material for the most part. But the abundance you get is wonderful, right?
Absolutely. Well, you can see how well everything's growing. So so you just went down the list. So
good.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay.
In a nutshell, I think you hit the highlights. So you not only get this orderliness, but it's more efficient in terms of watering and ease ergonomically. So for folks who have trouble bending down, and I met someone like that today, and at our community garden plot, and said, "Oh well, I can't garden anymore because it's hard to bend down, right, on my knees." So it's a lot simpler. So here's your watering can. You want to lift it up. Now, Toby, my son, of course, he's a bit more adventurous. He likes to get up and walk around. So you see, when you build your raised beds out of pallets and you put a cap on them, then it gives you this extra benefit and extra adventurousness. And you can walk around the garden without touching the ground. So that's nice. Picking out weeds, really simple. So you're watering, and at the same time I can pick up the weeds, and I get both of them. both things done at the same time. So there's lots of benefits. I mean, there's a few. Everything has its advantages and disadvantages. With raised beds, what you really need to worry about or make sure that you have a plan for it, the watering or the drying out of the soil. Because, right, the whole thing, especially with these raised beds, these are about 25 inches off of the ground. But it's pretty high. That capillary action is not as strong. I mean, there might be some water coming up from deeper in the ground. Probably not here because it's really sandy soil. So that means that you really have to keep on top of watering. Now, there are a few things that you can put in the soil that helps the soil retain the water. So those of you who've gardened might have added peat moss to your soil. So peat moss does that. And of course, as an ecologist, I would say let's not use peat moss because you're mining these peat lands. And once you mine the peat land, you've destroyed it. So ideally, we shouldn't be using peat moss. I'll be honest, I did put some peat moss in, but that was just once off at the beginning. So that's one thing. The other thing, Harry was kind enough to bring some over today. I don't have it open, but it's called Biochar. Biochar has been used by indigenous people, maybe not around the world, but definitely in South America. They've been using it for thousands of years, adding it into the soil. So it's wood that you burn really slowly with little oxygen, and then you take that charred wood and you add that into the soil. And once you do that, those particles are really effective at hanging on to nutrient particles and water particles. So that's one thing to watch out for, is the drying out of the beds. Of course, there's, this took me quite a bit of time, to build it all. So there's some investment ahead of time, but mostly in time. So, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why you came here today, Diane, and TREA, is because we want to be, as we're going deeper and deeper into this climate emergency, civilizational emergency, we want to have responses that will be effective and that most people can do. So I think this is something that anyone with just minor skills in carpentry can do, and with just a bit of investment. So if you flip the page, the second page is about the steps, and that's what I'd like to demonstrate to you. So some of the steps, I'll speak to others, I'll demonstrate. Okay, so really, really inexpensive. Pallets, where do they come from? If you don't have your pallet angel just dropping off 30 of them, then you might go to Cops Build All downtown. They have a big pile and you can pick up as many as you'd like. You can go to various, in the industrial part of London, all these businesses that have pallets that they no longer need, and you can pick them up. You should probably say hi to them. And then we've been digging into this, and there's some, pallet manufacturers, pallet recyclers for at the outskirts of London or maybe even outside. You might have to go outside where you can pick up these pallets. And then you organize them because they'll come in different sizes. So the ones that you see here, these are over all this work that I've done, okay? So I don't know if we can see this, but these are a lot thicker boards. So I obviously use the best ones first, right? So these are the pallets that I used first, and then the leftover is kind of the thinner and falling apart. So I would, you could still probably use this. Mm-hmm. I would not recommend taking these apart because that takes a lot of work to take pallets apart. So what did I do with these pallets? Once I got them, and I had other leftover material, screws, plastic, tarps. Terry again was kind enough to drop some off. You could pick that up. You might have old tarps that you can use. So most of the materials You can scavenge from your garage. Maybe your neighbors have some material. There's one more piece that's important, the stakes, because this will give you strength. So once you have the materials, so what I did, so I had these pallets. They are usually bigger than this. So let's measure this up. Usually the standard, well, I don't know if they're standard size, but this is 40 inches. This one here was a lot longer, so that was 50. Height-wise, they are probably the other end. So I probably cut off about, I don't know, 10 inches. But I cut them to, so this is 24 inches. And what I was going for with as many as I could, just to cut them in half, because then you have 2 pallets, right? And so...
And did you cut down along the length of the wood or off the edge of the wood?
Yeah, I didn't cut like this, I cut. So the pallets come like this. So that extra extension, where's my, you can't see my cut. Anyways, would be, so I cut like this.
So you cut that piece in half?
Yeah, so with my skill, so I cut across like this. Yeah. So they must, so it's 24, so it must have been 48 inches in height. And then so that's what I have. This is a bit deeper. 15. So let's say about 24, 25 inches. That's the height you'll get. And if you saw them in half, you'll get 2 of them. Okay. Next step, you gotta plan out. Okay, so where am I gonna put this? Here in this garden, I started with that right there. That gave me a nice edge. I measured off of the side of the building. This is a pretty exposed area. It's a side yard. People come by. So I really want it to look nice. If you have a backyard where you don't have as many onlookers, you might just throw it together a lot quicker. But I spent a lot of time making sure everything was as straight as possible. So that's where I started. I measured off the wall of the house, and away I went. So hammer, and so I flush with the top. So this gives it, it's, I probably went in a foot, maybe more. It's up to you, depending on the quality of your soil. If you have really hard clay or lots of rocks, so it's hard to pound into it, you might not be able to go very deep, but try to go as deep as possible. These stakes, which I bought new, they come in various lengths, so I probably cut off about this much from here. So this I found to be good enough. Let's see, measurement. So this is 37, so 24, so that went in about 13, 14 inches. Okay. So more than a foot, so that's great. And then I went with screws. I don't know, nails, it would probably be a bit harder to pound because the whole thing is moving. And this way, if I need to take it apart, eventually I will have to, right? So that's one of the other kind of disadvantages of these beds, is that no matter how you build them, and there's various other ways of building them, wood, eventually rots. The nails and the screws will rust out, and then things will start falling apart. But if you use any other material, eventually the plastic starts cracking, right? So we live in an entropic world where things just fall apart. Okay, so next step you have, you line up everything. And since I wanted it perfect, I used level. I made sure that it's level this way, that way, everything, double check with my measurements and all. Okay, So that gave me my first screw. I added another one, so 2 screws per stake. Then I would add my, so first build out this corner piece. There's not enough space here, but it would be something like this. Add in another stake here, and then screw. So a thing to keep in mind is that with especially this much soil, in the winter time, water freezes, right? So it will start pushing the walls out. So that's why I recommend using 2 of these stakes per pallet. So that's what I did. And on the inside, so add it here. And then it's really important, especially with really long beds like this, to have these cross braces to keep the whole thing together. So the stakes are really important. Go in a foot, if you can, a bit deeper, and then screw it all together. So I, screw it here, where as much space as you have. So in some instances you just can't access it, so there might not be screws everywhere in these pallets. So I won't do that. Okay, any questions so far?
What were the cross pieces you were talking about?
So at about 8 feet apart, I have these cross pieces that I, again, screwed into those 2x4s, right? So I would have something, so let's say, if this is the raised bed, so here would be the other wall of the raised bed right there, I would screw them together like that, just to pull everything
It's
together.
not a pallet, it's just a piece.
It's just a piece, yeah, sitting kind of on top like that. But you could also put it lower down and build it into the whole thing. But again, once wood's is in contact with soil, it's going to rot even quicker. So that's, I guess I'll go back to that. I wanted to make sure that the material, so these pallets are sitting or are not sitting on soil. They could be sitting on flagstone, they could be sitting on gravel, chips and dust. Here I use chips and dust underneath because I did have a pile that I needed to use up. So I'm like, okay, that's a good use for the chips and dust. So I put down chips and dust. What you're trying to do is prevent wood touching soil. Through that, it picks up more moisture. There's all those microbes in the soil, and they'll help break it down quicker. I mean, you can't really win. Eventually, the microbes get there. In the winter time, it picks up moisture, and things will break down anyways. But if you can keep your wood away from soil for as long as you can, that's good.
So you don't use any wood preservatives?
Thank you for that. So I didn't use any preservatives. So this is untreated. Good question for another reason. It's because when you go for pallets, you've probably seen the pallets that are painted, right? The ends are painted. And I think that means on almost all of them is that they've been also chemically treated. So you would find a CT. And this is really important. You should look at the pallet and find HT. So you want HT pallets, heat treated only. Maybe there's other kinds too, but I know that the 2 main kinds are heat treated and chemically treated. I think if you're going so international packaging, so you're using a pallet for that, then it has to be, they're using chemically treated wood. So you don't want those pallets. You want heat treated only.
And the other thing is, if you're any good in recognizing wood, you go for a poplar.
If you're good, I'm not good at that. So I couldn't tell you what.
Well, that's a pine, but the reason you go for poplar is that the taste of the wood doesn't get into your vegetables.
Oh yeah.
And all food products are transported in poplar pellets. So if you can source your pallets from a food factory, it'll all be clean.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. So yeah, if you have that time and resources, car and everything to look for your pallet, then put some extra time and get the best pallet possible. Okay, so I did not. Oh, sorry, Tammy, you had your hand
I
up.
was just going to ask, how many seasons can you usually get out of your bed before it starts?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay.
Because this is an experiment for me. Speaking with others, I think Shane, you probably said about 5 years. I'm hoping for closer to 10 years, so 5 to 10 years. There's Beautiful Edibles, small company by Jana Keller is the name. And she builds them differently. She doesn't use pallets. She uses planks of wood, and I think it's white oak. Yeah, that's what she uses. And she doesn't build them this high, so maybe 18 inches off the ground. And she finds that wood lasts for about 10 years. Okay. And she doesn't use, because I'm going to get the plastic, she doesn't use plastic on the inside. So in her beds and in many other beds that you can look up, you can go to the internet and find a zillion ideas of how to build these beds. So in most of the others I've seen, where they're just using, one plank of wood, they're not putting an extra layer of plastic. But I did. With pallets, you pretty much have to. Because, and you can see why. So here we are. By the way, I did add an extra piece of wood that went across. Because, right, you have all this soil that we're going to put in here. And clearly, we'd have to use the plastic. Or you'd have to put something else that would keep the soil in. Otherwise, the soil would just flow out. So plastics are important. And on top of that, if there's no wood here, then it just bulges out. So I added and made sure that there was pretty good coverage on both sides. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So after I finished the walls of the bed, I would take the plastic and fold it up, top. And I went as close to the top as possible. Okay. And I would have, nice long roll and just take the stapler and then just go along here. And maybe add in a few more staples down here, right? And I probably let it overhang by about, 5 inches. So again, there's the soil and water should not get to the wood. I mean, the plastic pieces, if you're using older plastic, then there's holes and the water will find its way across.
So where do you buy the plastic?
I did not buy plastic because I had my pallet and plastic angels show up and leave stuff on my driveway.
Yes.
So that was Terry. Terry, where did you get the plastics from?
It's available from the roof truss people. They buy big trailer loads of wood.
Yeah.
Comes with tarps.
Yeah.
They roll them up and they're happy to have you take them. Hundreds of tarps around the place.
Right. Yeah. So thank you, because you brought lots and rolls of it. So I could do all these beds, and then Shane reminded me that a good thing to do, again, to add more life to your pallets, is to cover everything for winter. So I didn't do that last winter, but this winter I plan to cover the raised beds so that the snow doesn't get in and freezes, thaws, and all of that. So I think that will give it maybe another year. Okay.
And there's also another thing that you can do.
Yep.
I'll just show you. You can put a thinner one. You run it down the back here, so that this now is separate from the structure. So that'll extend the lifespan.
So you mean like
That's
a
where you
piece
get
of
your
plywood?
5 years, because then that's
Okay.
now in
Yeah.
just air. So it's not going to decay as quickly because there's nothing against the wood.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so that's
it
another
just,
good idea.
when do you stop adding in materials?
Yeah.
You know, so.
Again, the point I started at, I had all this extra material. I had right where you're sitting here was a big mound. So that's why that kind of raised bed at the end. It wasn't really a raised bed. There was all this soil in front of it that I needed to do something with. And I had this orderliness problem or chaoticness problem. And you know, some other things I read about the benefits of raised beds, and I'm like, okay, let's try this. So I'm not an expert in raised bed building or design or using pallets. This is, you know, kind of my foray into it. I like to do things, you know, experiment with things, and I have lots of friends who give me good ideas. And so yeah, so I'm experimenting. I'm really hoping that I will not have to take these apart anytime soon. So 10 years would be a great, you know, it's a great time to not having to do anything with it. Okay, so let's see. You're adding the stake, the plastic tarp. What else? We talked about. Okay, yeah. So we're at the stage where we're adding stuff. If gardened before, and especially if you've read any books on permaculture, have any of you read up on permaculture? Kultur is one technique that permaculturists use. And the idea is, again, using unwanted pieces of wood and other organic matter. And so it's a raised bed, but without any of the structure. So if you have big logs, branches, and other organic material, maybe weeds or whatever you have in your garden. And I think this really makes sense if you have a bigger place. Farmers, I know there's permaculturalist farmers who use this technique. There's lots of dead wood. Anyway, so they pile all of this up. What do they put at the bottom? The big logs. Okay? And then they add the smaller and smaller things. They pile them up. So, and you have a long, elongated bed of this material, and then they cover it with soil. So that's a hugelkultur. Okay, raised bed without all this, and then you can plant into it. Why is that good? You're using up all this unwanted stuff. You don't have to haul your logs away. And as things start decomposing in that bed, then it releases nutrients. All that decomposition also helps with adding humus, and that hangs on to water, nutrients again. So, yeah, Shane?
So can you fill your beds here in that way?
That's what I'm getting to.
Oh, okay.
So I knew about hugelkultur, and I used the same kind of principle here. At the very bottom, I had the biggest pieces of, you know, branches, or I think I even had, there used to be a big Manitoba maple. That's why we have this pergola here. Because before it was a big tree. Anyway, so I had bigger pieces from that, and I had cuttings, raspberry canes, and all these things. And I just started adding it. So at the bottom, I added the biggest branches, and then the lower quality soil, because I also had deeper soil. So I would add that on first. So that's, you know, the lowest part of the bed. And then I kept on adding different materials. I had some manure, aged manure. I added that in. Another layer of soil. And at the very top, it would be, you know, really good compost. A three-way soil that has some manure in it, or think they also have peat moss in, right? You can pick some up if you go to the garden center, as Taylor you've been doing, and sometimes they just give it for maybe 50% off, or if they know you really well, you might get it for free. So those 25-liter bags of soil, and if there's a hole in one where they can't really sell as easily, then you can pick that up. Thank you, sir. So that's what I used at the top. Okay, I had good soil, compost at the very top, and I planted into it. Everything settles. So first year, everything went down probably by that much. So all that, the canes, the logs, the uncomposted compost, so undecomposed compost, all that decomposed, everything settled, and I topped it up. And I have to do that next year as well. But that's fine. That's to be expected. If you have very sandy soil, it is a good idea to mix in biochar or add in as much organic matter as you can, because as it breaks down, the organic matter, the really hard or the humus particles, they remain in the soil for many years, and they are the ones that help you with retention of nutrients and water. That's how you can help your really sandy soils. Okay. I also added the top. Definitely an option for making it look really nice. You can then use it as a sitting area. You can walk on it, but if you just leave it open, that's fine too. Whatever you have, whatever material you have to work with. Okay, so the other thing, see all this structure? It's a lot easier to add any structure to a raised bed than to an in-ground bed. I mean, I could have done this without the wall of the raised bed, but it was a lot easier to attach these wire meshes. So now I have a nice tunnel here, and these pole beams running up. So last year we had must have been 25 kilograms of beans. And just every day we could pick new. So it was great. The kids had a lot of fun picking all those beans. So you can add different structures. Here's another similar idea. If you want to add to the length of your season, right? So you want a tarp, you want a mini hoop house. That's also a lot easier to put up than in ground. Again, you don't have to bend as much, so it's easier for you, and it's easier to attach things to the structure. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
How did you attach one tarp to another, like that one I'm looking at? Down.
Sorry?
One tarp to another, like at a corner, sort of.
The overlap. Yeah, so the important thing is just to overlap. So, you're running out of, one tarp ends here, and then...
Sorry, I didn't mean that.
Oh,
I didn't
yeah,
mean that.
no.
I meant...
Yes.
The pallet.
The pallets.
How you join them at corners.
Oh, okay. And that's why I went into the shed to pick this up. So I also had extra screws of these really long, these must be, 10-inch long screws. We use them when we put up the siding to the house. So you could see one here. I mean, this is a weird angle, right? Well, no, it is. Sorry, no. Here it's fine. This is perpendicular, but I wanted to make sure that it looked as symmetric as possible. So this is how I finished it, and I used a super long screw. You can buy these in Home Depot. So this really pulled it together. But if you just have a normal corner, then you can get away without using these. You can just screw things through the 2x4. So make sure that you're getting wood in both pallets, and that should be enough. I had some weird angles on some of here I have some weird angles, and on those raised beds. So where I wanted to make sure that everything is nice and secure, I use these longer screws. So that's pretty cool.
And the other thing is you don't have to use screws at all, because sometimes people can't use screws. They don't have the wrist power. So you just drill a hole, and you'll put maybe an aluminium wire or a mild steel. You can buy it in the dollar store for $2 a roll. You get a lot for it. And you just thread it through,
Yeah.
and then you just tie it, and it just pulls things together. And really, that is as basic as you can get it.
Yeah, so that's even simpler. So the one thing about irregular raised beds, there you need to really plan out, and you might actually have to cut this way as well. You might have to shorten some of the pallets so that they fit, and that's what I had to do in some of those raised beds where I was trying to go along the curve, right? So it's really hard to do that with these pallets, but you can do it, and you can have a lot of fun measuring twice, 3 times, and then still screwing up your cut and then doing it again. So it was great. Yeah, and then when I finished it, I asked my family, hey, come and have a look. And they come out, and my son looks at it. Hey, Dad, that's a ship. It's a barge. And I didn't even plan it. And I'm like, yes, it's an art. It's Gabor's art.
Very good.
Yeah.
So as far as soil quality, if you want the raised garden to last like 10 years, do you just add compost to it every year?
Yeah,
Or
top dressing.
Yeah.
Style.
Okay.
So, it's best not to dig your soil, right? Keep on digging it. So when I first started adding in the soil, I did make sure that I mixed up everything nice. But I'm not planning to do any type of deep digging, just adding from the top. And I always add, not here because this is fairly densely packed full of stuff, but you can see the straw. So I like to use straw as a mulch. That also helps in keeping evaporation down, so you don't have to water as much, right? Keeps the weeds down. But weeding is really, it's a treat in a raised bed because there's not a lot of it, and it's really, here's some, pull it out, and those really bad weeds that like to travel underground. I mean, I'm sure that they might find their way into it eventually, but you don't get that constant reinvasion. You weed your one part of your garden in that garden, and then the roots come again, and then you have to do it constantly. So here, obviously there are weeds, but I'm doing probably 1/4 of the weeding that I did before. So a lot less weeding.
How about chipmunks?
Chipmunks will find. Okay, so let's talk about animals. Yeah, the animals, squirrels, chipmunks. I was speaking with someone yesterday. They said, well, I saw a groundhog climb up to a tree. So apparently groundhogs would also be able to easily find their way into it. But rabbits, not so much. Rabbits too? I haven't seen a rabbit eating my cabbages yet.
You will.
They will. It does cut down, I think, on even for a groundhog or anything that more traveling along the ground. You're laughing at me. I haven't seen those critters. I've seen the squirrel. I've seen the chipmunk up there. But I think this lot, where we don't have. Okay, there's a big tree, but we don't have as many big trees as some other folks do.
Well, I haven't seen one squirrel the whole time we've been
See?
here.
There you are.
I don't understand
They're
that.
all
That's
over
a
my
natural.
house.
I have 27 squirrels in our back garden.
Well, do you talk to them?
enormous.
I sit them down at the beginning of the
I
growing
shout at
season. Say, "This is mine. That's yours."
Mm.
Well, you have to talk to your neighbor to stop feeding the squirrels nuts.
Oh yeah. Actually, we have a few neighbors, and that's what happened. But maybe that's actually why I don't see them here as much. Because they know that the
They
food is there.
forgot.
They go there and they forget about this.
Like, there's no way your apple tree would have any apples in our garden. Not. We all eat them now.
Yeah. No. They do go up, but I don't have 27. So that's good. Well, we have the skunk, the resident skunk.
Mm-hmm.
They'll show up at around 9.
Yeah.
And the raccoons. Yeah, we have them all. But as you can see, the garden is really lush and there's a lot of produce. And it's just now kicking into high gear. So, we have the tomatoes, peppers, cabbages, carrots, got cucumbers running up there, beans, the pole beans, bush beans, and lots of beets, lettuces. This is the herb garden, so we put that as close to the kitchen as possible, right? It's always a good idea. So herbs, and then kind of the overall concept to this garden is that we have vegetables, herbs, close, it's the closest zone, and now a really orderly zone. And then behind it, and also interspersed, lots of fruit bushes. So this is a black currant, but I also have raspberries. Of course, the flowers that bring in the pollinators, because I really believe that that's important. And then back there are all the fruit trees. So that's a plum. You can see the pears on the pear tree. So the squirrels have left those alone for now. A lot of pears in that, right? We had a really nice crop of sour cherries at the far end. We have Asian pears, other apple trees. This year is not the best year for apples. We had that cold spell in the spring, and it kept the pollinators away, and I think a lot of the fruit froze, the flowers. So it's not a good apple year. But yeah, lots of plums, pears. So back there is the food forest, chaos, order here. All for very little money, but lots of muscle power. Yeah, I love spending time in the garden.
Well, I think the big thing about any of these gardens is the whole concept of bricolage, of finding bits and learning how to put them together. That's really what it's about. Because if it becomes an expensive thing, this could cost anywhere between nothing and $12,000, depending on how you want to have it built.
I was probably between, I didn't add up the bills, but probably around $500 when all was said and done. One thing I forgot to talk about was what to do between beds, because I have multiple beds. And again, I wanted it to look really nice and sharp, so I bought pea gravel. I put down landscape fabric, the construction grade, the hard geotextile, and then put 2-3 inches of pea gravel on top. So that's what's between the beds. And then I bought these old 4x6s. So this is my edge all the way around. So in fact, I've created raised beds all around. So I have these really high raised beds, the pallet raised beds. I have these 4x6 edge raised beds. I added some soil here as well. And then in the driveway, I have the recycling bin raised beds. So that's also a really easy way to start growing your own food. So if you have old boxes of plastic boxes, so recycling bins, that might have a broken edge or something like that, so you're no longer using it for recycling, well, you can put it to this use.
Do you cut the bottom out?
I didn't cut the bottom out, but I did drill some holes. Yeah. And if you have lots of weeds that you don't want to put on your composting, because you're afraid that, that little root that you might be spreading your weed next year when you spread out the compost. So if you don't want to do that, then you can use a blue box, put it full of bishop's weed and all the nasty weeds, sprinkle it on top with some soil, and then you can plant into it. So I am growing sweet potatoes. And when I tried it first a few years ago, we got sweet potatoes. Now I've really come around to this idea of raised bed gardening, and I totally advocate for it.
There's a website that deals with self-watering, of insights.
Yes.
And that's really worth going to.
Yeah.
Because if you can have self-watering, it cuts out another task.
Absolutely.
And
I know I've heard of these wicking beds,
wicking beds,
right?
yeah.
Where you're adding, so you're putting in a pipe at the bottom of your bed, and you have to make sure. So you're just adding to that piping system, and then you make sure that the water is at the water level set for your plants. Where you, so the idea is that the roots start sucking up the water. I've also heard that it does not work all the time, because probably the problem is that you put the wicking, those pipes too low, so that the capillary and the pulling action doesn't kick in. I think you have to be careful with that.
It's
that
popular
idea.
in California, but I think that the problem in California is coming here very quickly. That these things dry out.
They dry out. Yeah. So that's one solution, wicking beds. The other one is if you just lay, I could hook up, if I had a bigger tank, I could just hook it on to water line, drip irrigation, right? And then run the lines in there, and that would water the garden. I haven't done that so far. I've been walking around with my cans or my buckets, and that's how I water. So probably every other day. And as the plants grow bigger, maybe every third day. Any other questions?
How long did it take you to get all this built? Was it just one season and it was done? Or was it slowly you built?
Okay, so I built all of these beds and those beds, so let's say 5 of these last year. And then I finished this site, so there's 1, 2, 3, and the ones out there. I finished those this year. I was doing a lot of other things, so it's hard for me to say, okay, it took me 1 week or 2 weeks. But I know that I was working on this for at least a month. Again, doing other things like bringing the soil from here and moving soil from one pile to the other. It's a really small garden, so now I'm at the stage where there's not much room to maneuver in. And that's why I spent a lot of time just figuring things out, right? How to do it, how best to do it. So, I spent a nice chunk of time doing that. But it's what I do in the summertime. I can say that that raised bed in our driveway, I had the materials and there's no leveling to be done. I just put it right on the driveway, right? So I built it in less than a day, and I filled it with soil. So if you have all the material set to go, if you know what you're doing, you can finish 1 or 2 in a day or 2, right? It's when you don't know what you're doing and you have other things that it takes longer.
So would you recommend that if you're going to do this type of stuff, that it's an individual, or should you get some friends and try and do it as a community?
Oh, I always love working with others. I did get my kids involved. They helped a little bit. When they're teenagers or preteens, so they drift away. The key idea that you raise is bricolage, kind of using things, leftover things, and piecing them together in new and innovative ways. So that's a really key idea for the future. And then the other is this idea of working together. I think it's a lot of fun, and you pick up ideas from others, right? I don't know if there's a term for that in English. I know in Hungarian there is one. So
what is it?
It's a really nice word. It's called kalako. So similar to like the Amish communities to this day, right? If you go visit them, like how do they build a barn or a house? They have the cousins, everyone's there, and they finish the job in one day. Yeah.
Like, one of the other things that you didn't mention is that you were exploring the idea of making the tops of some of them into glass houses.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good idea. And you were going to use it again with bricolage.
Yes.
It was glass from sliding doors.
Yes. Still an idea that I'm working with. I don't know when I'll get around to that. That's something that you could do. So for example, so one idea is to build a greenhouse around these two beds. So I could build walls here and actually tie it into the house. So attached greenhouse. That's a nice project for the future. You can lengthen your season. You can start early, right? Start your seedlings early, or keep on growing into late into November or December.
I think that's an extraordinarily important concept.
Yeah.
Touch on intensity of growing. I mean, you can grow more in this kind of raised bed because it's much easier. You can pay more attention to it. You're maximizing your space is where I'm going.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's the case?
I think I'm becoming a lot more productive, and efficient. And I think one reason is that I no longer have that jungle part, right? I can pretty much access every corner of the garden. But yeah, you can keep your eye out on all the beds a lot easier than if you would have in-ground beds. And also do that integrated, right? So you can have more vertical growing, right? You can, like we talked about the structure that you can build easier. So you can have the vertical and then you can space in, add in things underneath. I think the raised bed, because really it focuses your attention to that area, I think it does lead to more efficient gardening. Now, as a scientist, I haven't done the measurements and all of that, but someone else could do it. But I'm sure that would be the case. I'm sure that we would find that probably grow more stuff.
So you're already doing it. You're going vertical.
Yeah. And I've added in another tunnel over there, and I'll probably add in a few more things.
I think the management of raised beds allows you to focus on second seasoning. It allows you to focus on more intense planting. I think I think your effort goes into maximizing production rather than in trying to maintain and weed and so on like that. That's where I'm going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that that's the way it works.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot less weeding, maybe a little bit more watering, especially the way I'm doing it. But I could go through some of those other systems, yes. And yeah, so now I spend more time. I have more time to actually look at plants a bit more and look after my tomato plants. Whereas in the past, I would just kind of let everything do its own thing. I can add in, a second crop, right? So, I mean, you could do that in an in-ground bed as well. But again, if you're keeping a closer, a closer connection, closer look at your beds and what you're growing. And I think.
Can you do
more
nighttime gardening now?
Nighttime gardening?
Yeah.
You mean like
can
like
you
at
work
this time,
later
like
in the
7, 8 o'clock?
evening? Well, there's a lot of light now.
Oh, yeah.
When it's dark.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to be out till dusk.
I sort of feel that, I don't know, but I sort of feel working with this type of arrangement, you can use smaller tools. You don't need shovels with big long handles.
Right.
Am I correct on that? That your whole concept of tool has changed. That you can carry the tools in a satchel or something like that.
Yeah, and the weeds where I know that I'm getting the whole root structure, since the soil is looser, no one's stepping on it, right?
Yeah.
So I can just pull it out with my fingers. So I don't even need a tool for weeding.
Very much so. Most of your planting is done with a small fork and a shovel.
Yeah.
You don't need the big. It's very interesting.
Yes. Trap it up. So raised by gardening is new for me. I've learned a lot. I have lots of help, and And that social aspect of gardening, I think, is really important. The idea of using up leftover things and kind of integrating that into something new and beautiful, that was a play out here. I've really, now that I look at it, and now the neighbors and the family look at it, they're like, hey, maybe you're not as crazy as we thought you were. and they can see the productivity. All in all, it was a good decision to come down this way. So thanks to everybody for coming.